So after 40 years practicing pediatric critical care, anesthesiology, and pain medicine, and pediatric hospice care, Dr. Nancy Glass retired from clinical practice as Distinguished Emeritus Professor of Pediatrics in 2022. She received her MFA in writing from the Vermont College of Fine Arts in January 2023 and is currently finalizing a collection of pediatric hospice essays. Now, I also want to say that Nancy is multi-talented. She amazes me at all the things she can do. She is a gourmet cook. She is a master gardener. She can ride a tractor and pick up stuff. I mean, how fierce is that? And let's see, what else does she? Oh, and she studies birds. She's an expert on birds. So, I mean, she just blows me away with all of her talents and kindness. And anyway, take it away, Nancy.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm going to see if I can get this up here. I'm going to read you a very short essay called What's in a Name? And it's about a baby I saw who actually had the same name as my aunt. And it's a very old-fashioned name. And I did not expect to see it in a baby whose parentage was from Africa. I did not expect to see that. So I'm just going to read you this, and I actually changed the name to another old-fashioned name in my family of a different person. And I think that probably worked here. What's in a name? Names are important. Why our parents give us one name and not another tells us a great deal about their culture and religion, about the naming conventions at the time of our birth, and sometimes the name tells us even more. Throughout my career, I've asked parents about their children's unusual names, how to pronounce it, what it means, what its origin is, whether the name is a family name, etc. But when I began practicing hospice medicine, I asked about the name of every child I saw. It's a quick way to build rapport and demonstrate interest in the child as a unique person. Every parent has a story to tell. Asking about the name gives us insights into the family's culture, background, spirituality, excuse me, and values. It opens the door for families to share prior losses if they named the child after a dead sibling or other relative. It gives me the chance to learn about important influences in the parents' lives, especially in the case of perinatal hospice, when parents have learned during pregnancy that their baby's life will be short. The name they choose carries all of their hopes and dreams for the baby. The name is how they will remember the baby forever. I went to visit a newborn baby with a lethal condition, living with her parents and two active toddler siblings in a small apartment not far from the father's place of employment. Her name was old-fashioned and did not sound African. After introductions and pleasantries, I asked the mother, how did Alice get her name? I've always loved that name. It's the name of my favorite aunt. The mother, a strikingly tall, beautiful Black woman who did not look like she'd just had a baby, smiled and pointed toward her husband. I named her, he said, for the aunt who raised me. I sat with that for a few seconds and waited a little longer. Can you tell me how it came to be that your aunt raised you? He took a deep breath. He told me that when he was a young boy, his village in a Central African country became embroiled in a long-running civil war. One day, soldiers came into the village and began slaughtering everyone they found. His aunt grabbed him, ran into the forest with him, and they escaped the massacre. Everyone else in his family was murdered. His parents, his siblings, his aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone he knew. His aunt adopted him, raised him, educated him, and helped him get to the United States for more opportunities. Since then, he had completed college and professional training and had secured a good job. He moved to Houston at the urging of a church friend, met his future wife online, and convinced her to come to Texas too. His aunt had died some years before, but he told me he was thrilled when they found out their third child would be a girl, so he could name her in his aunt's honor. What could I say to that? Knowing, as I did, that the little one would likely die within weeks. Had he not heard what the obstetrician told them about the baby? Did he not believe the dire prognosis that had been explained to them? Alice died at the age of 3 weeks, quietly and gently. Her memory will be forever linked to her father's beloved aunt through the sharing of their name. I don't think her father misunderstood what he had been told at all. I think he simply wanted to honor his aunt's life with this one precious, beloved gift, Alice. I'm going to read one more story before I talk about the writing part. The story is a little bit longer, but I've taken about 40% of it out. This one was published last year, and it's called Kids Always Know. This is a story about failures. First, about my shortcomings as a pediatric hospice physician to guide parents toward the most peaceful death for their child. My inability to do the one most important job in this tender space. It's also about that rare situation in which well-meaning, loving parents were unable to do their part in preparing their child for death. Our joint failures intersected at a sad, lonely death for sweet Jacob. The responsibility for those failures is mine to shoulder. Jacob was a smart, funny, elementary-age kid, great with Legos. He had 2 doting parents and a younger sister, a close, loving family with a strong faith. They had a huge extended circle of friends and family who provided meals and helped with his little sister and came over to visit and support Mom. Jacob had a malignant tumor in his lower brainstem, the neck part, and upper spine. His parents took turns staying with him during chemotherapy, where Jacob masterfully constructed Lego projects on the days when he felt good. His body tolerated the aggressive treatment well, but his tumor continued to grow. When there were no other treatments he could offer, Jacob's oncologist invited me to attend a meeting with the parents. He introduced me as the hospice physician with whom he had worked for many years and told Jacob's parents that it was now time to consider hospice care. There would be no benefit to further office visits, blood work, scans, or chemo. It was time to focus on Jacob's time at home and on his comfort. After the oncologist set the stage, I asked, "What does Jacob understand about his cancer?" We told him at the beginning the medicine would make the bad cells go away. I counted to 20 in my head. "What will you tell him now?" I pressed. We told him he's going home. The doctor will call us when it's time for chemo again. Over the next few weeks, I'll try to help you find the words to tell him the truth. We'll bring you some books you can read for Jacob and his sister. Meanwhile, I'd encourage you to be open to any questions he asks about what's going on. Kids always know more than we think they do. Over the next several months, Jacob grew weaker and weaker. When he came home from the hospital, he could walk with assistance until he couldn't. His mother would carry him to the couch where he would play video games and watch movies on his iPad until he couldn't. She never left me alone with Jacob, fearful I would introduce the idea of dying. I assured her I would never do that without her permission. Excuse me. But she always hovered nearby. Jacob answered my questions with superficial answers, seeming to know instinctively what his mother wanted to hear. I didn't have a chance to develop a closer relationship with him because his mother inserted herself into every conversation, speaking for Jacob to keep my visits short. She did the same with our nurses. By the time of my last visit, Jacob was paralyzed from the neck down and needed his mother nearby even to scratch his nose. His voice became shakier and softer until he could hardly speak. Now all he could do was watch movies on his iPad all day long. The change in his voice alarmed me. I was afraid he would suffocate at the end of life as his tumor infiltrated the brainstem's breathing center. I was afraid his death would be unnecessarily traumatic. And still, his parents could not bring themselves to tell him he was dying. I'm afraid it'll make him sad, his mother said. I looked back at Jacob on the couch as his mother and I talked in the entry hall. What do you imagine Jacob is thinking now that he can't move? Does he ever ask? No, she said. He doesn't ask. He used to ask when we were going to go back to clinic, but he doesn't ask anymore. That's because he knows already, I thought to myself. She tried to hold back her tears. Sometimes he wakes up at night crying, but he says he's just having a bad dream. I just can't tell him. I stood there in the entryway, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, one hand on the doorknob, feeling the pressure to get this right. You know, I remember taking care of a child one time whose mother talked with her about her death in such an amazing, gentle way. I went on to explain how the mother told her daughter that life is like a marathon, a very long race. She told the little girl that she, the child, would finish the race before her parents or sister, and that when she got to the finish line, she should just wait there for her family because they would join her soon, and then they'd all be together again. I found this mom's explanation so comforting myself. I wonder if something similar would be helpful for Jacob. She nodded tearfully, but said nothing. I was under no illusion that I had given her the courage to introduce the topic. I know this is hard for you. I can understand how sad it will be for you and your husband to have this conversation. And I'm sure he'll be sad to think about leaving you. But he needs you to be at your strongest now. He needs to know the truth so you can answer his questions and calm his fears. I tried not to let my irritation show. Our social worker brought books and scripts that other families had used, guidelines for helping the couple talk to Jacob. Carol offered to help the parents plan and practice a conversation about death, but they never told Jacob what was happening. How lonely and isolated he must have felt, and scared. I wondered what he thought about when the house was quiet at nighttime. I wonder if he ever had visions of family members who had died before. I wonder if he ever had dreams that gave him comfort, floating on a cloud, running and playing again. Of course he knew what was happening to his body, but he also knew that his parents were not open to talking about it. I was so sad for Jacob. His story has haunted me for several years now. I feel like I failed him. I should have been able to guide his parents more effectively. I should have been more persistent, more persuasive. I should have been a better guide. But what else could I have said? I wondered if they told Jacob how much they loved him every day. Or is it possible that they held back on telling him how much they loved him to keep him from guessing that he was dying? And now, years later, do they harbor any regrets about what they said or didn't say? I think about Jacob every time a parent tells me they don't want to talk with their child about death. I don't accept the excuse of waiting for miracles or praying for the cure. I don't accept the excuse of not wanting to take away hope, because miracles, prayers, and hope can coexist with truth-telling for dying children. Every time the issue comes up, I tell them that the child always knows what is happening to their body, that not telling them creates a distance between parents and child at the very time when the child needs their love and support the most. I push harder for Jacob. Okay. And this, I believe, is going to be, for obvious reasons, I think, the last essay in my collection. It's called The Call. One Saturday morning, I was walking the trails through the oak forest on our property, looking for the pair of pileated woodpeckers I could hear furiously pounding their heads against a tree trunk. My phone rang with a similar rhythmic urgency in my pocket, as though in conversation with the woodpeckers. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and noticed an out-of-state number. Usually, those are spam calls. Usually, I ignore them. But on this morning, some deep, tingly feeling, a premonition, an intuition perhaps, compelled me to accept the call. It was Kim, the mother of a young adult, Aaron, who died in our hospice unit more than 5 years previously. She said she'd been thinking about me and decided to call. How brave of her to call. What emotional energy she must have expended to make that call, to take the chance I would remember her, that I would pick up the call. When I said, "Of course I remember you," I heard a soft snuffle on her end. As she brought me up to date on how she came to live in a neighboring state, I heard hints of family disruption and financial strain. She was no longer working for her longtime employers, two men who had been supportive and forgiving through the long grind of her son's lifelong illness. She wasn't very specific about the troubles she'd been through. I remember her sharing with me about her health challenges too, but I don't remember the details now. What I do remember were the threads of poverty, sorrow, and isolation running through her story. Her son Aaron was in his 20s when I met him, a young man with the intellectual and emotional age of a much younger child. He was about the size of a 10-year-old boy, but hunched over like an old man, with an unforgettable elfin face to match. Like many youths who've grown up in the hospital, Aaron had an outsized personality and a practiced banter from interacting with kind nurses and generations of medical residents. He was an entertainer. Kim and I laughed and shared stories about her son's zany personality, about his antics on our unit as his life ebbed, flirting with the nurses. I told Kim the blue beanie bear Aaron had given me still rides on the dashboard of my car, slumped over like Aaron, a memory, a talisman, my personal protector. Kim told me she wanted to express her gratitude again for how we had cared for the both of them. Right after he was transferred from the hospital to the hospice unit, I discovered the pair was homeless, staying in cheap motels during brief periods when Aaron was not in the hospital, keeping their possessions in a storage unit. His mother worked full-time, but she had missed a lot of work with his illness and couldn't keep up with rent payments. Somehow, she had felt safe back then, sharing with me they had no place to go if the hospice unit couldn't keep him until he passed. And somehow, I had found the words to build a trusting connection with the two of them. His specialist at the hospital had no idea the family was homeless, even after 20 years of caring for him. I've reflected a great deal on the experiences I had with this young man. His decline was slow and relentless, but while he could still get out of bed, he wandered the halls, stopped in to visit the nurses at the desk, and spent many languid hours out by the garden gazebo where his mother went to smoke. In the early evening hours, herons and egrets would land in the garden from the nearby bayou, looking for insects or crawdads, tiptoeing like ballerinas through the grass. I taught Aaron to recognize the differences between the big herons and the little ones, the egrets from the herons, the black-crowned from the yellow-crowned night herons. He learned their names and shared his observations with me about their behavior. His mother reminded me on the phone that on the last night of Aaron's life, a black-crowned night heron landed on the window ledge outside his room and stayed for a long time, looking intently into the room. A messenger? His ferryman? I'll never forget Aaron's memorial service, held in the chapel of a facility for disabled adults 50 miles outside the city, neat cottages surrounded by live oaks and gently rolling hills. I remember the tales his friends and family members shared about the many kindnesses and special opportunities provided to Aaron in this rural community, how compassionate neighbors lifted him up and included him in local festivities. I remember the praying mantis that landed on my car door as soon as I parked, still there after the service ended, her forelimbs folded in benediction. No, I didn't forget this young man and his mother. It had been a privilege for me to walk alongside Aaron for his final mile. I could never forget them. Today's call was a powerful reminder that grief is never over. It's never done for parents who lose a child. Kim's sadness and longing may ebb and flow, but it never goes away. Today, the desperate need to talk with someone who remembered her son reared its head for this bereaved mom. Kim's call was a gift to me today, and I hope to her as well. As we ended our conversation, I asked her if she could feel my hug.